Testing, testing. Testing. Okay, testing, testing, testing. Testing, 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 testing. Sounds good. All right. Well, it must be pretty close to 6:30, isn't it? Okay, can everyone hear me okay? I apologize for the sound. I don't understand why I'm getting feedback, but it's just like being at home, getting feedback everywhere I go. Hello. Let's sit over here, please. Oh, hi, Gordy. You can move some of the puppets, too, if you like. Okay. Okay. It's probably about 6:30. Gordy's here. Yeah, okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for making time out in your busy days to come down here to the Bishop's Cathedral. I'm Jeff Jarvis, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned about the Wahpekute Dakota. And before we get started, what I'd like to do is send this clipboard around and have everybody sign in. If you want to get notes from the program here and sources for some of my material that I'm using, I'll put it all in an email and send it out sometime in the next week to everybody that signs up. Okay? All right, good. I guess I can't get too close here. It's the spirits. Okay. Anyhow, this is the opening event of Heritage Days, and it's just really a natural thing to want to present this topic to people from the area, especially Faribault, because this is Faribault's heritage. I mean, this is the ground that the Wahpekute and the people before them lived on. And I just learned that there was some others that lived here even before that. So interesting. It's an interesting topic. Nobody's going to ever really know all the answers, right? So I'll tell you a little bit about what I know, what I've read in books, and I've learned from some of the elders, from the different reservations, Lower Sioux and Mendota, mostly. So here we go. So we're going to talk today about Faribault's native heritage, and there's certain people that really have made, you might say, a splash in history. History hasn't recorded everything about the Wahpekute people, but this lady on the bottom left, she's got an interesting name. I can't pronounce it too well, but there was a book written about her by this lady, Ramona Kiddo Stately. This was her great grandma, who was born at Cannon Lake in the Wahpekute village. The next guy over is Pepe. He was like second in command, might say, to Red Legs, the last chief of the Cannon Lake Wahpekute village. And the fellow second from the right on the bottom, that's Visiting Eagle. That was Red Leg's brother. And I don't know his Dakota name, but anyhow, and then obviously Alexander Faribault was half Dakota. So that's basically the foundation of our city. Okay, and not to mention the French Canadians that came down here from Mendota in Canada to help set up the town and work with the natives. So one of the things that, some of the residuals from when the Dakotas lived here, they left behind a lot of place names, and Todd and I were talking before the program about the different names that were left behind, and Lake Mazaska is one of those names. That Maza is silver. Yeah, go ahead. There's only one channel on, so thank you, Todd. So anyway, I wanted to mention this is being live streamed too. So all the extra feedback and everything you hear is going to be on the recording as well. So anyhow, Lake Mazaska is one of the Dakota names. One of the first ones I learned was the Dakota, they couldn't say Alexander, so when they would come here back in the 1820s, 30s, they substituted the word or the name Alexander with Adek, and T means dwelling of Alexander. So this area, before it was named Faribault, was named Adekti. So kind of a little unknown fact. The Cannon River was Inyan Bo Sadatawakpa, River of the Standing Rock. It was named after the Castle Rock figure, the obelisk, over by Castle Rock, Minnesota. Has anybody seen a photograph of that whole thing? Okay, it used to be like a 60-foot tall sandstone spire, and when I do programs, I let people know that the Dakota didn't really have signposts that we follow. They didn't have Google Maps. So what they would say, they would name geographical features in a picturesque way. And so that's where the place naming became so picturesque. The Inyan means God of rock. Sadata means standing erect, and Wakpa is always river. So basically it's river of the standing rock, if you can follow that. The Straight River, before it was called the Straight River, it was Owotana Wakpa. That was a Dakota name given by Wahpekute, or forerunners to Wahpekute. It means morally straight. Okay, it doesn't mean the river's, crooked or kind of straight. It means morally straight. It has nothing to do with the twisted nature of the river. Okay, so the lake that I live on, Cedar Lake, was called Made Wita Ota, and that translates to the Lake of Many Islands. We have 3 islands and maybe a 4th. Okay, so everyone's heard of Tatapaha Boulevard? Okay, right south here. Well, Tatapaha is a Dakota word, and it means windy hill. Paha is hill, and Tata is windy, wind or windy. Okay, one other one, Wolf Creek, that comes out of Circle Lake over by west of Northfield, okay? And the creek that comes out of that is called Sanktu Kacha Wakpa Dan, and that means wolf-like. And so the creek was, well, it's known today as Wolf Creek. Don't make me say that other word again. It's a little tough, and I don't have the inflections in my English to really do the Dakota words justice. So anyhow, Wolf Creek passes underneath Highway 3 just before Dundas out there. Okay, so that's just kind of a quick little primer on Dakota language. So if you remember Paha, that's hill. Made is always lake. And Wakpa is river. So do we have any former teachers in here? Okay, there will be a quiz for you people. Okay, so anyhow, getting on with the program here, I met a fellow that was the tribal historian down in Nebraska. He since has passed away. His name was Dwayne Whipple. His family was named after Bishop Whipple here. But Dwayne told me that, yes, the Dakota, or Wahpekute, descended from Lake Mille Lacs, a village in Lake Mountain, by the Lake Mille Lacs area. But before that, now these are his words, he said they came from South Carolina. There's a Santee, South Carolina, and he thinks they came from there, and he didn't give me any printed evidence of that, but I take his word for it. Anyhow, it seems like the Wahpekute have always been on the move. You know, most of us like living one place. Some of us, you know, for our whole life in the same house. But not so with those folks. They had a big battle with the Ojibwe up at Lake Mille Lacs. And I think it was I don't remember the name of the battle, but it was pretty severe. And so Wahpekute got bounced out of northern country down to our area here. And they took advantage of the lakes and rivers, and it was really a Garden of Eden here for them. So they settled out on Cannon Lake, and maybe some of you know where the village site was. Anybody? Okay, going west out of Faribault, you take that big curve to the right that goes down to Cannon Lake. That was the beginning of the village site, and it goes all the way down to the big bridge where people fish down there. So that whole right side, and probably the left side, was village ground. And it was a planting village for spring and summer and early fall. So they had bark huts out there that they would just leave up from year to year. And if they got damaged by the wind or storms, they just put on new elm bark or whatever they needed to do to maintain those structures. So around 1834, through a series of a perfect storm of situations and conditions that really the Dakota really had nothing to do with. It was more about economics and starvation. We'll get more into that in the next slide, but the next place they moved from Faribault in the 1850s was to reservations in Nebraska and the Dakotas. So a little drawing that I did of the Wahpekute out there on Cannon Lake. Doing drawings of what I think the village looked like helps me get right into it. I feel like I'm part of it more. and maybe some of you can understand that. So there was high ground on the backside, and that's probably where a lot of the burials took place, or at least the scaffold burials. And the lower ground next to the lake would be on the northwest side, I think. That was where all the summer birch bark huts were led. They were structured there, and they stayed there season after season. And it wasn't that, typically, the teepees were mobile homes. They took them wherever they went, like late fall to the deer hunts and to winter camp, winter villages. But I suppose they set those up, where the planting village was too. So that's kind of how I arrived at this picture. They didn't have like Grumman or Alumacraft canoes. They had canoes from hollowed out logs, and some were quite large. So it took a little bit of skill to get in one. They weren't they were a little tippy, I understand. So anyhow, we'll go on to the next one here. I should say this was also called Red Legs Village. He was pretty much the last chief. Before him, it was Tisagi, or his cane. And so a lot of the chieftains, are put in place through a lineage, usually family lineage. So anyway, around 1820s, the Dakota actually talked to the people in charge up at Mendota. I'm not sure if it was Tolliver, the Indian agent, or who it was, but Alexander Faribault got the license to do fur trade down here on the Cannon River, and I believe that was dated 1822. So he fiddled around doing fur trade in other locations before he actually came to the Cannon River. And there's varying accounts or information about which fur trading post he set up first, but it seemed like the trading post at Lake Dakota was the first one in 1826. And then he was he went down to Morristown from there, and then he just kept going east, Warsaw, and then to Faribault finally, where that was his last trading post here. I should say, I was reading the notes from the explorer Joseph Nicolet from 1838, and he talks about going to a lake that's just west of Lake Dakota. It's called Lake Elysian, but back then it was called Lake Okamon. That little ghost town is named after Okamon Lake. So Okamon is literally where the heron nests. So anyhow, when Nicola got there, Tisagi, the chief, was not there, but all the birch bark huts were there, but they're all empty. They were gathering nuts or something further north. So Inyan Bositak Tawakpa is the name of the Cannon River. You can see it there on the bottom. The fur trade was kind of a novelty, I think, at first for the Dakota, because it was just like, when Walmart came to town here, it's just like, oh, have you heard what Walmart has for sale? And all of a sudden, a bigger and better way of life presented itself to us, and maybe more economic, and we got rid of some of the old ways and old household goods, for new stuff. And so the natives, I suppose there were some that were really traditional that didn't really want anything that the fur traders offered. But for the most part, it was the majority of the Dakota bought right into the fur trade because they could get copper kettles, a lot of trinket stuff too. You can get that at Walmart as well, right? But they had alcohol, rum, whiskey, rifles, shotguns. So anyway, they kind of abandoned their culture a little bit by little bit in favor of the new mousetrap, the new gadgets that they felt made their life easier, more economical, more convenient. And that would really boomerang on them badly because they got really dependent on those items. And the problem was when the traders gave the Dakota families those trade goods, they expected furs in return, okay? And so the native men would have to go out and trap and hunt for food, but they'd have to trap fur-bearing animals to pay off their credit with the fur trader. Well, what happens when there's a bad winter and they can't get out, trapping? What happens when marauding tribes invade the Wahpekute area and they have battles instead of trapping? So there was all kinds of these factors that were coming into play, all heading towards a perfect storm, okay? So the fur trade really wasn't a positive thing, I don't believe, for the natives. So there was a lot of conflicts. And last but not least was starvation, because towards the end, fur-bearing animals became more scarce. And well, it's like when you have a credit card and you can't make your monthly payment. Well, that's kind of like what happened to the Dakota. You have to eat to have energy to go out and trap furs. You might even get smallpox, and how are you supposed to run a trap line when you're sick half to death, okay? Or battling the sock and fox from Iowa. And the one big thing that happened was the demand for beaver pelts in London dropped because they started using different material for the hats, okay? So the beaver hats, it's like they fell out of style, kind of like today's antiques. You can buy them for little or nothing, but 20 years ago they were holding their value pretty good. So anyhow, it was just a bad deal. And so the loss of culture, everyone has culture. My culture is I work, I'm a married man, I have nieces and nephews, I have a spiritual life, and that sustains me, okay? So I'm not Native, but what I'm thinking what happened was when you lose your culture, you lose your foundation. And just me thinking. So on to the next slide. What happened was Alexander Faribault was the fur trader servicing Morristown, Cannon Lake, Warsaw, and the Waterville, Dakota villages. And all these factors that I just mentioned were happening to these people. And I'm suspecting all these Dakota owed him money. So naturally, he would want to keep track of these guys, these people. He didn't want them moving to Nebraska or somewhere because, that was his meal ticket. So he invited them to stay here. And what were they supposed to do? Whoops. They didn't have their health was bad, economically poor, and they owed a lot of money. It was just really not a good situation for them at that time. It was a perfect storm. So they left Cannon Lake, and this is a drawing I did showing the dugouts on shore being pushed out, and the natives are heading downstream to Wahpekute, Faribault. And I suppose they used the travois system. They hooked those up to dogs too. That's on the right side in the bottom corner. And so I don't think they moved lock, stock, and barrel. I think they went back and forth after moving here in 1834, 35. If anybody remember Orwin Rustad? Well, he studied the movements of the Dakota, and he knew, or he put in paper that the Dakota actually had a footpath back to Cannon Lake from here, and the route of it went right up Division Street, right past Buckham Library, up the hill, down past Mobile gas station, across Lindale, and then past the cemetery along Highway 60. And then from there, it was just another mile to the Cannon Lake Village. So I'm sure they had a lot of grief about having to move. Nobody likes to move. So I'm sure the only thing that really went along with them were the teepees and their cookware and the canoes and whatnot. So living at Cannon Lake must have been a real Garden of Eden though out there. I mean, it's beautiful today, but back 200 years ago, the water level was a lot lower because in the last 150 years, the dams put in by the flour mills kind of have raised the water. Okay, so I think in some cases the water went right over the top of the villages that were left behind. So I do know that the Ackman family that live out on Cannon Lake, they talked about one of the peninsulas on the north side of the strip of land. I think they call it an isthmus. That was connected to one of the islands. It was just like a big long peninsula. And he said they grazed their cows out there. So, but that's all covered over with water now. But I'm thinking that that was probably a prime spot for the Dakota. They liked peninsulas, to be surrounded by water, and there was probably some burials out there too. So, anyhow, I'm sure they left Cannon Lake with heavy hearts. So, all these Dakota from these few villages along the Cannon River descended here in Old Town, down over here where Willow Street meets Division, right by Buckham Library. Okay, that was the beginning of the new town. We call it the Old Town today because that's the oldest part of Faribault. Okay, so just to make it easy for people, what I did was I did this illustration of probably what the village looked like. See if I can move here without setting off the... Okay. Well, anyway, so you see that right in the middle is Alexander Faribault's house. That was 1853, but 20 years before that, there was habitation of the Dakota from that spot next to Division Street all the way north on Central Avenue to the sewage treatment plant. 14 blocks. There was nearly 40 of these bar cuts that were set up. There was a person, a settler that came here in 1853, and she counted all those, so that's like printed down in history information. So can you imagine these bark lodges set up in a row where downtown is. You know, it was probably a dusty path running through there, connecting the bark huts. So these bark huts weren't really as small as I drew them there, but I guess they could hold like up to 10 people. And I've heard an estimate of 200, 300, up to 600 Wahpekute living here in Faribault. The Wahpekute were called shooters in the leaves. That's what the English translation of their name is, shooters in the leaves, which kind of pays reference to the fact that the Wahpekute settled in the big woods. You know, they shot, and anyway, so that's kind of how they were named. And so Faribault was called the Leaf Shooters Village before it was named Faribault. So anyway, so we're talking about you know, close to 20 years before Alexander Faribault built his house there. But on the right side there's a trading post. That was 1844, and it was a log cabin. And the Straight River is back behind there, and there's recorded accounts of the Dakota living along the Straight River too. So there was a lot of habitation, and I believe it when there was at least 300 or 400. So it must have been quite a spectacle. So, and I also did read in several accounts of Wahpekute here even in the late 1850s. So they were expelled from Minnesota, but they came back. Nobody likes to leave their homeland. So anyhow, what else can I tell you about this? Okay. Well, let's just go on to the next slide. I think that's probably about it for this one. Oh, okay. One of the things that happened when people live and die in an area, there has to be a cemetery, right? So right above Buckham Library on the bottom right corner is Peace Park, directly across from Alexander Faribault House. There was Wahpekute burials in there, you know, like high ground above the river. And that was the secondary part of their funeral practice. The first part was they wrap up the bodies and put them up on scaffolds or hang them from trees. And then after a year or so after the spirit has been blown away to the happy hunting grounds, the bones would come down and they'd bury them just in the couple feet down or whatever. And that's what happened at Peace Park. 1874, a city worker was digging fence post holes, and he dug up a portion of a grave, and it was human bones. They were Dakota, wrapped in buffalo skin, and there were brass bells in there. So anyhow, anyway, so I did this illustration inspired from a story that I got at the Rice County Historical Society. It was probably set down in like 1860 or 1855. This small boy, when he was a little guy, Alexander Faribault, brought him over to this funeral practice. And he said that Native Americans came from all over, just like that. I mean, he said it was just like magic. All these people showed up, and there was a bunch of wailing going on underneath the body. That wailing was a practice, a grieving practice. And there were French Canadians in attendance. So when he got to be an adult, he recorded this story. And I don't remember the fellow's name, but the story is at the Historical Society. And so if you look in the distance, that in the background behind the teepees, that's where Teepee Tonka Park is today. The Division Street would be running this way on this side, and Buckham Library would be right in front of Damon here. So, I really get into drawing these things. So some of what happened here with this Adekti village, Alexander's dwelling place, after the Wahpekute got settled here in like 1844, what happened was Alexander Faribault he established a farm, and the farm stretched from up to the south side of the viaduct all the way down past Frogtown. Everyone knows Frogtown, right? Okay, so probably about a mile of land along the river. And even to this day, people are still finding arrowheads in their gardens down there. So I'm sure the Wahpekute lived along there. So Alexander Faribault raised corn and wheat along there, and he had livestock, and he needed help. So he hired some of the natives, and I don't know their names, but one of the fellows that came down from Mendota was this Charles St. Antoine with his family. And there was a whole slug of these French Canadians that came down. A lot of them were mixed bloods, half-breeds. I'm not sure what the current lingo is on that, but half French Canadian, half Dakota. But this guy here came to Faribault in 1844, and he was a true voyager, back in the day. When he got here to Faribault, he was like 62 years old. He was an old man by that time. All the voyageur days were over because the fur trade ended, in the 1830s and 40s. So I suppose he was looking for something to do, and Alexander Faribault put out the call for help. So he came down here to be a superintendent of the farm, and he was kind of like a foreman, and he directed the natives what to do, how to take care of the product, or the farm and the corn and wheat and whatnot. So his wife, Margaret, was a daughter of a fur trader, Provencal. Her dad was a fur trader in Traverse des Sioux. Louis Provencal was his name. And Charles St. Antoine had been a fur trader through Louis Provencal, who ran the fur trading post at Traverse des Sioux. And I suppose, the way couples hook up is, he was lonely one day, and he went to the fur trading shack and saw his boss's daughter and decided, she would be a pretty good catch. So they got married. She was half Dakota, Margaret was, and Charles and Margaret came here in 1844, and she became Rice County's first teacher. She taught the Dakota children and some of the French Canadian kids as well. But she lived here for 27 years after that. She died in Faribault. She's buried out in Calvary. So that was really quite a thing. The St. Antoine family was really a foundational family in Faribault. They brought their daughter Margaret. I don't know of any parents that named their children after the mother, but they named their daughter Margaret, and she married Alexander Faribault's youngest brother, Fred. So that started off a whole new lineage there. But St. Antoine's are really interesting family. So as I'm studying a lot of this Wahpekute history and early Faribault history, there are so many stories, and if you're a historian like I am, the more you read, the more questions you get, you know, unfortunately. So the itch never really goes away to keep learning. And so years ago, I heard about Visiting Eagle. He was written up in the county history as being murdered at the Cannon Lake Village. And he was murdered by Jack Fraser, who was half-blood, okay? His mother was a Dakota woman from Red Wing, and his father was, I don't know much about his dad, but he was caught between two cultures, and he was pretty ornery, you know? He was considered one of the best hunters around, and but in these times, everyone was trying to make a living, right? And so he came to Adekti thinking, well, I can get some of these dumb Indians to trade furs with me. Well, the problem was he came here and all those furs were going to other people already, like Alexander Faribault, probably the biggest fur trader around. And they didn't have written contracts, but it was like mutual handshake agreements. And obviously, if I'm a native and I'm trading with Alexander Faribault, I don't want to give my furs to somebody else because I won't get credit on my bill with the fur trader. So anyhow, Jack Fraser killed Visiting Eagle because of that conflict. He says, well, you're going to die because you won't give me your furs. So anyway, Visiting Eagle and his family were buried in Alexander Faribault's dooryard. Dooryard is an old term for backyard. So that could be anywhere between the Faribault house and the little park, the burial ground. So anyhow, the guy on the right there is Chief Redlegs. He was the last Dakota chieftain out there at Cannon Lake. And he was still in control of the band when they moved to Faribault. But history wrote about him that he wasn't really a drinker, you know. And he saw plenty of his friends and family, you know, succumb to alcoholism. The Indians didn't grow up with, you know, the tolerance to alcohol like the Europeans did. So they had instant problems when they started drinking. So anyway, he, Redlegs, or Hushasha was his name, Indian name, he was a temperate person, and don't know a whole lot about him, but I do know that he went to Washington in a delegation of chieftains in 1858, and that's where the photo comes from. Dwayne Whipple, the historian, tribal historian from Santee, Nebraska, told me a little bit about him because he was great-great-grandson of Redlegs. And he said, one thing I always remember, he says, no, the Wahpekute, they didn't wear the full headdresses like you see on the stereotype Indians. They wore feathers in their hair, but they didn't wear the full war bonnet. So anyhow, this is one side story to some things that happened in Old Town, Adekti. So this is kind of an interesting story here. When I first started getting involved in this Native American history of Faribault, early Faribault history, I contacted people in Mendota because so many of Faribault's early helpers came from Mendota. Alexander Faribault came from there, his father as well. Alexander Faribault's mother owned Pike Island. You know, she got it in, I think in written into part of the treaty, one of the earliest treaties. But anyway, that Pike Island was a real sacred ground, and she was happy that she had it. But there was this lady here. She shall radiate in her path like the sun. She was born at Cannon Lake, okay? She was born a Wahpekute in that village. And so the story of her life goes like this. She became ready to have her first child, and no, she didn't go to District 1 hospital. What they did was, she walked 45 miles up to Mendota to this Pike Island, or an island connected to Fort Snelling there. And apparently there was a lot of what they call medicine growing there that helped with birth. So that was a traditional thing that Dakota women did. But could you imagine being 9 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and walking 45 miles? You know, it couldn't have been too fun. But anyway, let me backtrack a little bit. So up to this time, 3-4 years ago, I'd never seen a Wahpekute person. I didn't really fully comprehend that they were still alive. You know, that's one of the things that I talk about now. You know, we are still here. You know, the Dakota are still here. And they're flourishing too, by the way. But one of those people that's flourishing is Ramona Kiddo Stately. And she's beautiful, raven-haired lady, beautiful lady. And she wanted to come down and see where her great-great-great-grandma was born on Cannon Lake. So we met at Perkins, and she pulled in this really shiny, beautiful car, and she brought some of her winyans with her, you know, female friends, and I was totally blown away. She gave me a sack full of presents. That's the Dakota custom, but she was just so beautiful. I remember just like, oh, what did you say? You know, very pretty. Anyhow, so we went out to Cannon Lake, and she pulls this big Cadillac over, and they all get out, and looking over the bridge, you know, onto the end of the peninsula where the village was, and I thought, what an unlikely situation this is. I mean, generations and generations later, you know, one Wahpekute lady comes back, and so it was just really, it was a stereotype buster for me in a big way. But anyway, this Ramona wrote a book about her great-great-grandma's experience, and it's called The Story of Bedote. And Bedote is the meeting of the two rivers, Minnesota River and Mississippi, and that's sacred ground for the Dakota. So she talks about her grandma, who is pictured on the book cover there, as you know, traveling by foot to have this baby all the way up there to Mendota. And she talks about the irony of how she had this sacred thing take place. It was the birth of her daughter, her first daughter. And then several years later, here she's imprisoned there, because that's where, it was before or after the Dakota War. You know, they rounded up all the Dakota, and they put them in a concentration camp in the lower ground below Fort Snelling. So it was terrible, terrible situation. But anyway, that's a picture of her great-great-grandma. And what I wanted to mention was, I sent the clipboard around. Has that circulated pretty good? What I'm going to do, okay, if you can pass that on, John, that'd be great. Okay, so what I intend to do with your names and your emails, send them to, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do anything nasty. But I'm going to put down the the name of this book, and it's a really reasonably priced book. And you can choose to buy that if you like and learn some more about these things. So like I mentioned a second ago, they are still here. And this Ramona Kiddo, stately, the beautiful black-haired lady, she started an advocacy agency up in the Twin Cities called We Are Still Here, W-A-S-H, WASH. We Are Still Here. And she's aiming to change the conversation that's happening in society. She didn't really like me publicizing teepees and bar cuts, because, I mean, that's old history, and I understand that. I'm kind of caught up in the, what would you call it? I don't remember the word, but, anyway, she took me to the task on that, and she wanted me to know that the Dakota are like one of the hugest employers in the state of Minnesota now, okay? They are flourishing, okay? The Mendota Dakota, who aren't federally recognized as a tribe yet, they're working on it. They have a wonderful powwow in September. It's a small powwow, but it's totally family friendly, and it's beautiful, beautiful area. And so we're kind of winding down here a little bit. I want to thank the Cathedral of Our Merciful Savior for allowing me to do this program here. This is a very, very historic structure, a part of which the natives had help. They did their share of work here, laboring. For Heritage Days activities coming up Saturday and Sunday, we'll be having horse and carriage rides around Central Park. And then afterwards, a little strawberry shortcake. And Sunday, we have an ecumenical service where anybody can come. There's bluegrass music, and it's really a wonderful service. Sunday in the morning is the cathedral tours. That's after the church service. There'll be guided tours here, so if you're interested in seeing where Bishop Whipple's buried underneath the altar, you can see that. We have cabinets full of old photography, a lot of artifacts of Bishop Whipple's, some of his robes, and it's just really beautifully preserved. So I think maybe even you can go up and ring the bells in the tower. I mean, that's something that most people don't get a chance to do. So anyhow, that's all I have to say. Does anybody have any questions?
Is the church service in the park or in the cathedral at 10 o'clock?
The church service is right here, 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. Yep, good question. Father Jim. Awesome. really great. Emagabo is probably one of the biggest stories that's connected with Bishop Whipple. Like Reverend Jim said, Emagabo was in Ottawa. Did he convert to Episcopal? Did Emagabo convert from what he was before to being Episcopal? Okay. Okay. Right. In the country? Okay, right. Right. And he was a hugely loved man. He basically gave his heart and soul to the church. You know, like Jim said, he outlived all of his kids. He and his wife, that's all they did was work for the church. So, anyhow, any other questions?
Unrelated question, if it's raining tomorrow night, is the concert in the park going to be here?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you, Randy.
If it's raining tomorrow night, is the concert in the park going to be here?
Every night it rains on Thursday, will always be here.
Right. The Thursday night concerts always will have this place as a inside backup for inclement weather. So, yeah, good question. Hey, Todd, do you have a question?
Not much, I was just actually wondering if I made a statement about Bishop.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Do you mind if I tell one of our Bishop Whipple stories?
Sure.
So,
Come on up.
easier if I could.
This is Todd Finney. He is a Wahpekute, Dakota, from Medford, Minnesota. They call him Papa Bear.
Yeah, my name's Todd Finney. Most people know me as Papa Bear. My birth name is Tachante Washte Yuhao Mani, which means he who walks with his good heart. I am related to 6 of the men that were hung in Mankato in 1862. I'm an absolute direct descendant of Dewan Sa, the one who sings. It's said that he's the one who started singing the song when all of the men were hung. Also, my Uncle Jim Miller started a thing called the Dakota 38 ride, of which I led for a couple of years with my big brother. But Faribault is actually a really special town to us, because what most people don't know is that Bishop Whipple was the biggest person to try and change Abraham Lincoln's mind in the hanging. In fact, what I felt to share about that was when the men were being held in Mankato before the hanging, there was actually a medicine man, it was Crazy Horse's medicine man, who traveled from the Black Hills to pray for them before the hanging. And they said, you're not our medicine man, Bishop Whipple is our medicine man. And so in our culture and in our people, he's held with really high regards. In fact, if you go into the other building, there's pictures of my grandfather and other relatives in there. But yeah, I just wanted to tell you that story because those stories don't ever really get heard. That he was a man of peace, he was a man of hope, and he was a man of love, and he was so well respected that we actually turned away one of my grandfather and the men that were with him. He's actually my great-great-great-great-grandfather. But we don't do generational things. We just refer to them as first line. They actually turned that man away and said, no, Bishop Whipple is our faith leader, not you. So I just, as you're talking about Whipple, I just thought I'd mention that.
Great. Well, thank you, Todd. Great story. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll kind of hang it up for the night. Okay? Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thank you for coming. Hey, Dema.
I'll catch up with you soon.
Yes, I have your
Great job.
picture.
I love it, yeah.
I've been doing a little bit of